Imagine you're in a conversation that suddenly turns tense. Someone snaps at you, criticizes you harshly, or gives you that passive-aggressive silence that leaves you wondering, what did I do wrong? Naturally, your first instinct might be to question yourself. Maybe you retrace your steps, overanalyze your words, try to fix what feels broken in the dynamic. But here's something we don't talk about enough. Most of the time, it's not about you at all. People carry emotions like cargo. And the heavier the shame, the more volatile the load. Anger becomes a release valve, a defense mechanism used to offload discomfort without ever confronting the actual source. We often think of anger as a standalone emotion, but more often it's a cover, a disguise, and what it's hiding is shame. Shame is deeply internal. It whispers, I'm not enough, I've failed, I'm exposed. It's the voice that turns regret into self-loathing and guilt into paralysis. But instead of confronting that feeling, some people externalize it. They project it. They weaponize it. And that weapon ends up pointed at whoever's standing closest. That's where you come in. You see, when someone lashes out at you, when they get irrationally upset, it's tempting to take it personally. But it's more accurate to see yourself as the surface they crashed into after losing control of their own emotional vehicle. You didn't cause the crash, you were just in the way. And what makes this so complex is that their anger might even look justified. They might dress it up in reasons, throw accusations that sound plausible, or focus on your tone, your timing, your delivery. But none of that is the core issue. The core issue is internal conflict. And anger is easier to express than shame, because anger feels powerful, while shame feels weak. Think about it, anger pushes outward, shame collapses inward. And no one likes to feel small. Psychologically, this behavior is rooted in what's called defense projection. It's a way of unconsciously shifting attention away from a flaw in the self by identifying that flaw in someone else. If I feel like a failure, and I haven't accepted or healed from that feeling, I might accuse you of being too critical. If I feel inadequate as a partner, I might lash out over something trivial to avoid facing that inadequacy. In that moment, the goal isn't clarity, it's survival. Emotional survival, that's what's really at play. Philosophically, this reflects a very human tendency. We struggle to see ourselves clearly. We avoid the mirror. We avoid the stillness that reveals who we really are. And the more we avoid that reflection, the more we resent others who force us to see it. That's why your presence, your success, your confidence, your calm can trigger someone else's discomfort. Not because you've done something wrong, but because they feel exposed in your presence. Like a light was turned on in a room they were trying to keep dark. And here's the critical shift. When we start to understand this, we reclaim our peace. We stop over-personalizing other people's behavior. We stop apologizing for things that aren't ours to own. We gain distance, not emotional coldness, but clarity. That kind of clarity lets you stand in compassion without becoming a target. It gives you the power to say, this isn't mine to carry. Now, does this mean we excuse harmful behavior? No. Accountability still matters. Boundaries still matter. But what changes is your internal dialogue. You move from self-blame to self-awareness, from being reactive to being resilient. And once you stop absorbing everyone else's pain as your own, you start showing up differently. You stop shrinking to make others feel comfortable. You stop over-explaining yourself just to soothe someone else's unrest. You begin to lead with understanding, not just of others, but of yourself. So next time you're on the receiving end of someone's sudden anger or coldness, ask yourself, not what did I do wrong, but what might they be running from in themselves? Because more often than not, they're not mad at you. They're ashamed of themselves. And when you realize that, you stop taking the blame and start taking back your power. Let's talk about something we all sense but rarely name, the tension that arises not because of who you are, but because of what your presence reflects back to others. It's subtle. You walk into a room, you're calm, grounded, maybe even doing well in life, and suddenly someone gets quiet or distant, or worse, they get critical. And you're left wondering, did I say something wrong? Did I do too much? Not enough. But here's a different way to look at it, one that takes the emotional burden off your shoulders. You didn't trigger them. You mirrored them. Sometimes your very existence confronts people with what they've avoided in themselves. Not because you intended to, not because you're trying to make a point, but simply because of how you carry yourself. Your growth, your boundaries, your self-awareness, they act like a mirror. And what they see reflected can be uncomfortable, even painful, if they're not ready to face it. Think about the nature of a mirror. It doesn't judge. It doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't soften the truth. It just reflects what's already there. So if someone is battling insecurity, your confidence might feel like a threat. If they've been suppressing their potential, your progress might highlight their stagnation. If they've been hiding from accountability, your honesty might make them feel exposed. It's not that you're doing something to them, it's that they're feeling something about themselves in response to you. This is where emotional maturity becomes essential. Because when you understand this, you stop shrinking yourself to avoid reactions that were never about you in the first place. And instead of internalizing their discomfort, you start recognizing it for what it is: misdirected energy, displaced emotion, a protective reflex. Psychologically, this is what we refer to as social comparison theory, the idea that people evaluate themselves based on how they measure up to those around them. But here's the twist: those evaluations aren't always conscious. Sometimes they're deeply rooted in unresolved narratives, childhood beliefs about worth, past failures, internalized shame. And when those narratives get activated, people react not to you, to the story you awaken in them. This is also where a philosophical lens helps. In the works of thinkers like Carl Jung, we find this idea of the shadow self, the parts of us we disown, deny, or bury because we're ashamed or afraid of them. But those parts don't disappear. They just sit beneath the surface, waiting. And when someone comes along who embodies what we've exiled in ourselves, strength, truth, vulnerability, success, we feel that shadow get stirred, and instead of sitting with it, we deflect, we blame, we resist. So when people get angry at you, distance themselves, or criticize your choices without real cause, sometimes they're not reacting to your behavior, they're reacting to the emotional mirror you unknowingly held up. And that mirror, it's powerful, not because it judges, but because it reveals. Now, let me be clear. This isn't about walking around thinking you're better than anyone else. It's not about superiority, it's about self-awareness. It's about knowing the difference between your impact and your intent. Because you can walk in truth, in love, in integrity, and still cause discomfort in those who haven't found those things within themselves yet. And that's not your fault. It's not your job to dim your light so someone else doesn't feel the heat. It's not your responsibility to make others comfortable with your growth. Your only responsibility is to stay rooted in who you are, to lead with kindness, and to let go of the emotional gymnastics of trying to manage everyone else's reactions to your life. When you start seeing yourself as a mirror, not a threat, not a trigger, you begin to walk through the world differently. You stop taking things so personally. You stop apologizing for your peace, your standards, your evolution. And instead of retreating to protect someone else's comfort, you lean into your truth and let it speak for itself. So the next time someone pulls away, acts cold, or suddenly critiques what you've done or who you've become, pause before you blame yourself. Ask, what might they be seeing in me that they haven't yet faced in themselves? Because maybe, just maybe, it's not that they're angry at you. Maybe they're just afraid of their own reflection. There's a fine line between understanding someone and taking responsibility for their emotions. And too many of us were never taught where that line is. We think that being kind means absorbing someone else's pain. That being compassionate means fixing what we didn't break. Somewhere along the way, empathy got confused with self-abandonment. And that confusion, it's where burnout, resentment, and guilt start to quietly build. Now, I want to be clear, empathy is powerful. It's necessary. The ability to see another person's pain and not judge them for it, that's a strength. But empathy without boundaries, that becomes a weight. It turns your emotional clarity into emotional codependency. And that's when you start saying things like, maybe I should have done more, or maybe it's my fault they feel this way, when in reality, you were simply in the blast radius of someone else's internal struggle. Here's the truth. You can understand why someone is angry, hurt, or distant, and still not be responsible for changing it. Just because you see someone clearly doesn't mean you need to carry them. That's not unkind. That's healthy. That's sustainable. Think about this from a psychological angle. We are wired for connection, yes, but we're also wired for survival. And when those two instincts clash, we often choose connection at the cost of ourselves. We'd rather hold our tongue, ignore our needs, tiptoe around someone's anger because we're afraid that not doing so will mean rejection, abandonment, disconnection. So instead of asking, is this mine to hold? We ask, how can I fix this so they'll feel better and I'll feel safe? But that pattern keeps us trapped because it teaches us to center other people's discomfort over our own truth. Now, here's where the philosophical piece comes in. If you look at the Stoics, thinkers like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, they spoke often about the importance of knowing what is within your control. And what's in your control? Your choices, your reactions, your principles, not other people's emotions. not their choices, not their healing. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that their healing is their own responsibility. You can care without carrying. And honestly, some people don't want to be helped. They want to be rescued. They want to offload their emotional baggage at your feet and then get upset when you won't pick it up and carry it for them. But that's not empathy, that's emotional enmeshment. And it comes at a cost: your peace, your clarity, your sense of self. There's a better way. Start by asking yourself this: is this feeling mine, or did I pick it up from someone else? If you're constantly walking away from conversations feeling drained, guilty, or like you need to make things right, even when you didn't do anything wrong, you're likely carrying something that doesn't belong to you. That's not emotional intelligence. That's emotional overfunctioning. And it creates a dynamic where you're always giving and they're always taking, until eventually you've got nothing left to give. And here's what's wild: the more you do that, the more you enable the very behavior you're trying to protect them from. When you absorb responsibility, you rob others of the opportunity to grow, to confront themselves, to develop emotional resilience. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone sit in the discomfort of their own feelings without rushing in to fix it for them. Because growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in reflection, in pause, in tension, and people don't grow when they're constantly rescued from that process. So when someone projects their shame onto you or lashes out because of their own unresolved pain, your job isn't to absorb it. Your job is to stand firm in your integrity and say, I see your pain, but I don't have to own it. That's the real work: staying soft without becoming a sponge, holding space without losing yourself in it. You're not heartless for setting boundaries. You're not cold for choosing peace over pleasing. And you're not selfish for protecting your emotional energy from those who mistake your empathy for an open door. So the next time you find yourself carrying the emotional weight of someone else's struggle, ask yourself one simple, powerful question: is this compassion, or is this self-abandonment? Because understanding someone's pain should never require you to sacrifice your own. There's a quiet kind of power that comes from emotional clarity, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself, doesn't chase validation, and most importantly, doesn't internalize other people's chaos. When someone is angry at you, distant with you, cold toward you, it's natural to feel unsettled. We start writing scripts in our head. What did I do? Should I apologize? Should I confront them? Should I fix it? But here's the problem: when we don't have emotional clarity, we confuse presence with responsibility. Just because you were in the room when someone unloaded doesn't mean it's your job to carry the aftermath. That's where clarity changes everything. Clarity is the filter that helps you separate your emotions from someone else's projections. It's what allows you to feel compassion without getting pulled into someone else's storm. Because not every conflict requires your reaction. Not every silence is yours to fill. And not every emotional outburst needs a response. Without clarity, everything feels personal. With it, you begin to see the patterns: how people offload their shame, how they cover insecurity with criticism, how they use anger as a mask for what they're afraid to admit. And when you see it clearly, you don't absorb it, you name it. You don't fight it, you step back from it. That's not detachment, that's wisdom. Emotionally unclear people are reactive. They take everything as a direct hit to their worth. They try to fix, explain, or overextend themselves just to feel secure again. But emotional clarity builds a pause, that moment between what happens and how you choose to respond. And in that space, you reclaim your authority. You realize you don't have to justify your peace. You don't have to water down your truth to keep someone else from boiling over. Let's take this even deeper. Psychologically, when we lack clarity, we operate from our nervous system, not our values. Our brain senses threat in someone's anger or withdrawal, and we instinctively go into fight, flight, or freeze. That's not consciousness, that's survival. And if we're not aware of that pattern, we'll start reacting to people not as they are, but as our nervous system fears they might be. Clarity interrupts that cycle. It invites you to ask, what's real here? What's mine? What's theirs? What story am I telling myself? And is it even true? It gives you the ability to pause, reflect, and respond from your principles, not your panic. And from a philosophical perspective, clarity is what allows you to live in alignment with your inner compass instead of being tossed around by the emotional weather of everyone else's bad day. The Stoics talked about this as ataraxia, a state of inner calm that doesn't depend on external peace. They understood that true strength isn't reactive, it's rooted. It doesn't need the room to be calm, it brings calm into the room. This isn't about becoming emotionally distant. It's about becoming emotionally sovereign. You start to realize you can listen without fixing. You can observe without absorbing. You can care without carrying. That's clarity. That's presence. That's power. But here's the part that most people miss. Clarity isn't something you just stumble into. It's something you cultivate through reflection, through boundaries, through the discipline of not responding to every emotional fire with gasoline. It's choosing moment by moment to be intentional with your energy, to stay anchored in your values, even when other people are trying to pull you into their storm. So the next time someone is upset, cold, or critical toward you, don't rush to fix it. Don't make their discomfort your emergency. Don't confuse intensity with importance. Pause, breathe, ask yourself, is this mine? Or is this just a reflection of something they haven't dealt with in themselves? And if the answer is that it's not yours, let it go. Because clarity isn't just about seeing others more clearly. It's about seeing yourself more clearly. It's the moment you realize your peace is not up for negotiation. Your presence isn't a problem to be solved. And your energy doesn't belong in every battle that comes knocking. When you protect your clarity, you protect your power. And when you protect your power, you stop reacting to noise and start responding with purpose.